What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Today's Best Served Podcast 268, and we're talking about no more trial by fire, restaurant training, or lack thereof. We're going to get into that today. This is Best Served Tableside Volume 2, and we're talking through this whole series, four-part series, not business as usual. There is a massive need and opportunity and huge challenges because of a pandemic, yet everything that's being exposed right now has needed to evolve for a long time in the industry. And so we're addressing those, right? We talked last week about paid what we're worth, living wage, and how restaurants really struggle with that. And then next week, we're going to wrap the four-part series talking about mental health. Very, very big issue. Huge vulnerability, again, for the restaurant industry. We're some of the greatest and most giving and sharing people, and we're also a little bit crazy. You have to be in this industry. And so diving into that, we have so high frequency of substance abuse issues. So many of us have dealt with that with our mental health, and there's just this tough guy, tough gal mentality that we need to really break down a little bit and understand how we can actually take care of ourselves, because we're good at taking care of the guests. We need to take care of ourselves. That's how we're going to wrap this series today. As always, we are trying to shred apart these industry standards. You know, I love my air quotes. Industry standards do not serve anybody who works in the restaurant industry. It does not serve any of the businesses. You can check every one of those boxes, and still we have 73% turnover rates, right? We have 56-day average tenures. We have restaurants, 60% of restaurants close in the first 12 months. These numbers, these industry standards do not work, and we have got to figure out a way beyond them and through them and build a new industry. That's what we're focused on. So, all right, enough of my ranting. I want to bring in Amanda Gaspolin, Justin De La Rosa to talk about this topic a little bit. And I'm going to have you guys, as we always do, kind of give us a little background. So, Amanda, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit, kind of how long have you been in the industry? What are a couple of the stops along the way that, we need to know about?
I've been to the industry about 6 years. I'm actually from Orlando, Florida, and I don't have a culinary background. I have a biomedical background. So
of course,
all
makes sense to be in restaurants, right?
Yeah, right. So I didn't go to culinary school. Everything I've done is self-taught. And I worked at a couple restaurants here in Denver and opened the Gaylord Rockies.
Oh yeah.
Now I work for I'm a private chef. So I try to get out of restaurants because of some of the reasons you were talking about.
Yeah.
And so now I pretty much do weddings and private stuff.
I mean, hugely challenged. Restaurants are challenged, and the event industry massively challenged as well. So appreciate that. I'm interested, having kind of gotten out of restaurants. We'll get into that a little bit because I'm fascinated. You also work for a massive machine that is the Gaylord and that group. So you probably seen both sides of the equation of like really sharp training and lack thereof completely, or maybe not. But we'll get into that. Justin De La Rosa. Good to see you, my friend. Let's give people same thing, background, kind of how long in the industry and what's been the trajectory for you.
Cool, yeah, man. Good to see you as well. And so I've been in the industry in, multiple parts of the industry for that matter for about, I want to say about 10 to 12 years. And everything from, my first serving job, back when I was in college, at this new burger joint. I did food writing in Denver for V.268 magazine, 303 magazine, Denver Post, and Denver Life magazine. And now I'm in Albuquerque, where I'm originally from, and got back into bartending a little bit here. I also did some marketing for a brewery here, did some social media, and once again, back into bartending. And so I've definitely seen every angle of it, and
this is great. Perfect. You two are perfect guests for this because we have one, the biomedical. Then why not get into restaurants, right? There's a lot of that where it's like I can't stand my job and I need to get in restaurants. Then in restaurants you have the when are you going to get a real job scenario play out. And so there's this polarization of how you get into the industry or how you get out of the industry. And then Justin highlighting there is no having one job in this industry. I've had 9, 12, 13 different titles throughout my career because you have to wear a lot of hats. It's strength and vulnerability, right? The ability to adapt, to bob and weave, to be counterpunchers, to be able to react to any moment, any situation, and find a way through. Fundamental strength. However, that's not the way you should train and plan to do business. You should have a good plan. Fake it till you make it is not a good strategy. It is not a good strategy. It's not a strategy at all. And we do that so often because there's so much social pressure within restaurants, right? And I love this one. Some quote, I know both of you have this experience, and everybody who's tuning in has had this experience. Been told in a restaurant, you've worked in restaurants before, you've had plenty of restaurant jobs, you should know this is the way it's always done. This is the industry standard. And that is just bullshit. There is no one way to do this. There is your way, and you have to invest the time and effort. And so there's a couple different scenarios that for me are kind of the big ones, and I want to get into your scenarios as well. There just is no training. That's scenario number one. There is no training. You just watch and follow people around until you see everything done completely wrong, and then don't do that. That's basically scenario one. Scenario two is interesting. Somebody else worked at a place that did have training, and they just copy and paste the P.F. Chang's training or the Gaylord training manual, copy and paste it, change a couple of the names on there to make it for your restaurant, but nothing that's on that training manual is actually what happens in the restaurants. Huge scenario that you see played all the time. So they gave you the training manual, yet you've never once actually utilized it in any day-to-day operation. And number three is it depends on who's working. You have to remember, 3, 4, 5 different scenarios based on who's working, who the MOD, the manager on duty is, or the chef that day, or the GM, or is it the bar manager who's in charge? And depending on who that person is, there's a completely different way that you do most of the jobs in that restaurant. These are 3 major scenarios. So, Amanda, I want to come back to you as I'm laying these out there as kind of just, I know all of us are cringing as we're hearing these because they're real. Like you see them every single day. And every time you hope this is going to be different, this restaurant, some part of this scenario plays out again and again. For you, did I touch on all of them or some other scenarios, ones that you see played out that you want to highlight? What are you thinking?
All 3. You hit on all 3. Coming from Orlando, Florida, I actually worked at Disney for a while. So I've been in hospitality since I was born because that's Orlando.
You're in Orlando. That's right.
Yeah, I didn't work at a restaurant. But either way, Disney was like to the T. They dot every T, or they dot every I, they cross every T. They're very good about training. And then even the first restaurant I worked in Orlando was very good about training. So when I got out here and the first restaurant I worked for, I won't name names, but there was none of that. It was like you got in there and like you said with the training manual, it would be the same way with like recipes. So I'd be like, how do you make this? They'd be like, go look in the recipe book. And there'll be some random ingredient that I'm like, oh, so where do you find this? They're like, oh, we don't use that anymore.
Yes.
And I'm like, so why is it in the recipe book? You can't just like take a magic marker and like cross it out.
At the very least, come on,
At the very least,
and scribble in the new word. If not, actually, imagine this: retype the recipe. Crazy.
The same thing happened too. It's like maybe I'd be doing something one way, and some person would give me unsolicited advice, like, "Oh, you need to do it like this." And so, okay, fine. You know, I'm pretty new. I guess I have to do it like that. And then someone else would come and be like, "Why are you doing it like that?" I'm like, "Oh, because so and so told me to do it like this." And they're like, "Never listen to so and so." And then I'll go and do it that way. And then the other person will be like, "Oh, well, never listen to that person." And it's just this like constant back and forth. I feel like it's just a power struggle, like trying to control your environment. It's a mess.
And then you're talking about something, it's like there's cliques within the restaurant too. And it's all of a sudden now there's these divides, and we create these like these microcosms of like, it's almost like there's political factions or something all of a sudden where it's like, well, what side are you going to be on? Are you going to be on the Brunoise side? Or are you going to be on the small dice side? I don't know, but we always seem to find a way to point the finger at somebody else to say that they're wrong because we don't want to take the time and the effort to recognize where and how we failed a lot of times as leaders with the way that we communicate everything that you need to do. And I think that's so important. Justin, same thing. I can see you say we have like a visceral reaction to all this because it's so real and it happens all the time for you. And any other scenarios that you see playing out, you're just like, not this again.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like, I've been part of the opening
Mm,
crew of a lot of restaurants, like, brand new places. And so we were the ones who kind of had to come up with like whatever the training was, or decide what that training was going to look like. So I've had, sort of that advantage, because, always within the first couple of weeks, you have
of
people
course.
bail, got to bring in new people, figure out how to train those people. Um, but, most recently it was just one of those where it's just like, you've done this before, like you've bartended before, just set it up. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, but when I start doing it the wrong way, when I start, or not the wrong way, but not your way, and then you get upset, or when people get annoyed by you asking questions, it's like, well, I'm just trying to do it right. That's plain and simple. And then the other scenario that I've run into, where I was a manager at a tap room. Said, okay, so like, what do you like really expect from me other than just kind of like the usual? They say, just make it your own. Just make the job your own. I'm like,
Uh,
like that.
there's a
I
difference between
appreciate.
take ownership of your job and make the job your own.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
completely different, right?
Yeah, I appreciate the trust and everything that goes into that, but
Right.
some strong direction would be, is really what's more valuable to me than making it my own, because and I crashed and burned on that, because
Surprise, surprise. Like what else?
yeah,
What other outcome is there? Some people do thrive in that, and you're like, look, see, that's how they were trained, and they're like one of the best in the game. You're like, yeah, they are. They did it
yeah,
in spite of you, not because of your lack of training. And that's
yeah,
the reality. Just because some of us thrive and then succeed, whatever the hell that means, does not mean it was anything to do with your training, with the culture that you had there, with the not paying livable wage. Like those were not the reason for that. People thrive despite that, and they should be commended, not you and your business, not you and your training, not you and your leadership style. So I really, really appreciate kind of you highlighting that as well, Justin, because that's such a reality. Amanda, I'm interested with you. Are there certain things now as you start to train people, like it's almost like you have to take upon yourself, like Justin said, now you have to own this. Nobody trained you. You had to crash and burn. You had to feel stupid because you had asked real questions and people gave you side eye, because why would you dare question anything in a restaurant, right? And now do you see yourself sometimes going in depth in certain things? Are there certain things that you have, like you have trauma, you have a little bit of trauma, so you want to make sure that when you're training somebody, you don't pass that on to them? Are there certain things for you that are those you must make sure that you train people properly on those because you never got that for yourself?
I think it's more like the mindset. Like I try to keep an open mind with my employees. Like I don't need them to do things exactly how I do them, because everybody does things a little different. There's more than one way to do things. So I do, in like Justin said, like kind of keep it open, like for interpretation. But if someone needs help on something, I'm more than happy to tell them exactly how, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know what the outcome needs to be, and they need to
Exactly.
have like clarity around the steps to get there. Yet they don't need to hold the knife exactly like you hold the knife. They
Right.
don't need to do, they don't need to scrub this way when it's more natural for them to scrub this way, whatever it is. I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's important for them to be able to physically manifest those things in different ways. What I think we touched on a couple different times, and I just want to put like frame to it, is you need to let people know how to succeed.
Yes.
Plain and simple. If you're able to accomplish this specific thing in this period of time, whatever the parameters are, if you do that, you will succeed. And here are the steps we've laid out for you to be able to succeed. And if you find a nuanced way that for you works a little bit better because I'm 6'2" and you're 5'6", or you're left-handed and I'm right-handed, anything that is an individual characteristic, absolutely you have the freedom to do that. And
Yeah.
just in the 42 seconds that I mentioned that, I could see both of you be like, yes, like, okay, I just have confidence enough to
I know
understand
Joe
that.
was talking to a chef here in Denver just a week or so ago. and he was talking about how things need to be done a certain way in the restaurant. And he literally like drew an X on the paper. And he's like, so I want something done this way, not this way. He's like, you see what I did there? I'm like, yeah. But you still got an X. You know what I mean? Why does it have this instead of like this?
Right. Instead of you being like, how about this? No, that's an A. How about this? No, that's a B. Why didn't you tell me that you wanted a fucking X? I would have made an X for you, but you didn't tell anything. Like, do it the way that I just did it. You're like, I don't know what you just did. And Justin, I want to come over to you because you mentioned the questions, and I think questions is something important. What is it? Like, why are we so that we don't like being asked questions? Because we think that it is diminishing our value. Because if you're asking me a question, you must be questioning me. And there's, again, like, as somebody who's a master of language, there's a difference there. Like, I'm asking a question because I want clarity, because I want to do a good job for you. I want to deliver for you.
Right.
I believe in what you're talking about as the leader in this situation. I want to deliver for you. Yet I'm not questioning your authority or your expertise. Yet it always feels like that. Because we're so passionate, we're so emotionally charged. You're telling me my kid is ugly? Fuck you. Like, and that's the scenario we get into. So dig into that a little bit. Why can't we get over it being asked a question? Because we think it's questioning our authority.
Well, I think, it depends on the person that you're working with. If you're working with a good manager who's really about like the success of, the bar, restaurant, and, beyond that, the employees and, their, happiness and growth within that, you get the person who appreciates questions. But then on the other hand, you have, the manager that you ask questions and it makes you feel small. It makes you feel like an idiot. And so, to me, like, we've talked about this before, if you give me the right tools to succeed, I can be your best employee. But if you don't give me the right tools, we're not going to get along. And, questions and answers are the tools for success, just really in any industry. Because I don't want to sit here and do the fake it till you make it thing. I want to be nailing it, whatever small thing it is. How do I break down the bar at the end of the night? How do you want it broken down? Well,
and tell that story. Every bartender is going to have this, right? We had a thread going, and you're like, here's a scenario that played out for me. I was like, yeah, that's once again one of those. You've worked behind the stick before. You've been a bartender at like some cool places. Just set up the bar. Well, what the hell does that mean? Talk about that as a specific example of a way that there's just a breakdown in communication. What you're talking about, Justin, is communication. We are pure and simple communicators. We use food, beverage, hospitality as the medium of communication. And for some reason, then all of a sudden we would get into interpersonal, it completely breaks down. Like all of a sudden it's like, don't question me, do what I told you. Well, just do it your own way. Well, that person told me to do it this way. Well, don't listen to that person. And all of a sudden it becomes this interpersonal angst and fight, and then you don't know what to do. So but go through that, because every bartender is going to know exactly what you're talking about. We've all seen it.
Yeah. So, essentially I started working at this bar. It's called Botanic Bar. And it's inside of the first food hall in Albuquerque. And I did one training shift that maybe lasted like hour, 2 hours tops, with some other bartender who's not even there anymore. And I was like, all right, cool. So, went to my manager and said, when do I work next? And he said, I'll text you the schedule. Maybe 2 days later, he had me on a double, solo for that matter. And
did he also go, here's the keys?
Yeah, right.
Open and close.
Yeah,
because you've worked here for 1 hour.
Yeah, and so I'm like, okay, whatever. So I go in and I figure that he'll be there to kind of, walk me through it, whatever. Just, because you only need once or twice to, have it snap for you. And so I was like, cool. So how do I set up the bar? And he just looked at me like, and he said the words, "You've worked at a bar before, right?" you know how to set this up. Just go ahead and set it up. But, I'm like, okay, so what's the garnish that I need to have set out? What's the appropriate amount of, prep work that I need to do, whatever it is, syrups, all that sort of stuff. Where do I get this? Where do I get that? And then, so I just went ahead and set it up the way that I would. And he comes in a little bit later once I've opened and I'm starting to, just stumble my way through cocktails. And, he comes in and changes up the way that I, set up all my shaker tins and my jiggers and all that. It's like, no, we don't do it like that. Oh, I want the fruit tray over to the side and, all this sort of stuff. I'm like, all right, cool. Like that's what you could have just told me earlier. And then, and then I'm making a drink for a guest and, I did something in the wrong order. We had this drink that had a butterfly pea gin, and we floated it on top. Looked real nice, all that. And I didn't float it on top. I mixed it. And he said, "Tell me you didn't just do that."
Come on.
I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, there's just so many places where it could have been, hey, just so you know, we actually float that on top. So just from here on out, make sure that you remember on this drink that you do it like that. And, it was just so many scenarios like that happened along the way. And, and after a while, I was like, I kept coming home and to my wife, I was like, I'm going to quit. Like, this guy's going to make me quit,
That's
so.
Yes, I do know. And so many people know they've been in that scenario. There's this like level of insecurity that it feels like is manifesting there, where it's like, if I get to tell Justin he doesn't know what he's doing, then I am somehow elevated above him, like that's, and it's just, it's huge. People see it played out again and again. And Justin, you mentioned something, and Amanda, I want to come over to you next because I'm interested. You've worked at Disney and then with the Gaylord Group, right? So, some of the best, Disney known for being one of the best training organizations, period, in the world. And so I was interested because Justin was touching on something that is so important to me, onboarding, right? And I want to play out a scenario because we've all seen it. And then I want to touch on maybe what you think Disney's done really well is hopefully we can learn something from what they're doing really well. You get hired at a new job. They say you start Monday at 2:00. Why don't you come in at 1:30? We'll fill out paperwork. You come in at 1:30. Lunch was crazy busy. And they say, you know what? Too busy. Why don't we just get you going? We'll get you on the floor. You're following Amanda. And then we go to Amanda. Amanda's like, oh, I didn't know I was training today. Oh, yeah. Just have them follow you around until they figure shit out, right? And then at the end of that shift, well, the manager left before you left, so you didn't fill out paperwork. They said, you know what? Just come tomorrow and bring the paperwork back. Well, that manager is off that next day, so they don't actually go through any of that process. And then the next day that they're on, you forget about it, and they think that somebody else handled that. And you're at payroll time, and they're like, you haven't been clocking in this whole week? No, I haven't. That employee now, there's zero chance that employee says, you know what? This company is really about accountability, about communication, about holding standards and expectations. Yet then when Justin makes that drink wrong, they were like, why aren't you holding to our specific standards? Why aren't you following the recipe, Amanda? You mean the recipe that says that it has 3 ingredients that we don't even use anymore, and you're going to hold me accountable to that? What do you think the lifespan of that employee is going to be? Not very long. And this is the reality. This is why we have that 73% turnover rate. Right? That's costing restaurants. Turnover costs $6,000 for a line level employee, $14,000 for a manager. If you have a restaurant that has 50 employees on average, that is a loss of $250,000 a year just for employees. And a lot of it is why we don't pay them enough. We don't have benefits. We don't train them. And we have tough guy, tough gal mentality. So having an off day is not okay with us. You check your shit at the door. You put a smile on your face because it's part of your uniform. These are the things that play out again and again. So again, ranting. You guys I get fired up. I know. Amanda.
Well, at Disney, you don't start until your paperwork's been filled out. That's a whole separate
Imagine that.
It's a whole separate department there. Yes. So you go through, they have their initial traditions thing, which teaches you what Disney is, what they're about, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And you work with HR for the first 2 weeks. You're just doing that. And then when you get to your location, they have people that have been designated trainers. So like they have like specific people that are designated trainers, and you're on the schedule to be trained for this many days. Like no matter what you know coming in, no matter how long you've been in the industry, you are trained for this many days to this protocol, and it is exactly like that. At Gaylord, it was a little different. I
want to touch on that. So there isn't the scenario, Amanda, another one that plays out all the time. You have 4 days of training, 5 days of training. It's laid out on your schedule.
Yeah.
And then on day 2, Aaron doesn't show up. And now you're doing Aaron's job. Right? That happens in restaurants all the time. Justin, you're behind the stick now. You're behind the bar because Aaron didn't show up today. Just you got enough training, right? And you go, no, I guess I can figure it out. They go, great. Just go. Does that scenario play out at a place like Disney?
Never. Not in my experience.
And rightfully it shouldn't. Like, look, I get it. Like, you got to figure shit out, and like you got to, again, bob and weave, make things happen. Yet you're setting that person up for failure. You just are. They might make their way through it, and then you pat them on the back. Wow, you really came together. That person knows, they're like, this wasn't right, and I feel wrong about this. And then you know what happens next? Oh, you did pretty good. Like, seriously? I barely survived. I made 4 of those drinks. And I only floated the gin on top 1 fucking time. Like, I don't think I did that good, but whatever. If that's the expectation you have. And then what happens? You don't need to train tomorrow. You got it. And then all of a sudden you're thrown into the fire. And then because somehow you survived barely, that now you understand everything you've been trained. And now your training is over. That scenario plays out. So again, Amanda, like, give us a little bit more, because I want us to have a couple of things. Training a specific trainer, not the person who happens to be in that section that day, I think is super important. Any other big takeaways that you think that we need to apply that you learned from Disney?
I think maybe just because they have so much liability. Like, Disney is like a company that people just want to sue. Like, they'll find any reason to sue them, so they have to cover their ass. Like, and they really
a lot of compliance stuff for them.
Yeah, it's all about that. And I can see how in like small businesses and such that would be hard to understand. But I still think it's important to have that structure in place, because if that structure's in place, then it won't fail. It won't fail as often as just throwing someone in there.
Yeah, just because people in restaurants, we are that band of rebels, Island of Misfit Toys, Pirates in the Pirate Ship, right? Just because we're not as litigious, just because we don't sue as often, doesn't mean that. How many restaurants have we worked at that have actually given us a thorough breakdown of the sexual harassment policy?
Right.
I can think of one that I've worked at in the entirety of my time, and that's because I said we had to put it together, because I saw multiple restaurants that it didn't happen. I was like, holy shit, we don't talk about that? Next restaurant, we have to talk about that. And that's the only reason that happened even, right? And so there's huge vulnerabilities. Just because you don't get sued as much as Disney, and honestly, it's not about being sued. It's about taking care of your people. And there's certain things that you need to regulate in there is no making the X this way. It is this way, and that's the only way. And usually that's the only thing that equates to is protecting people.
Yeah. So
I think that's super important. So I mean, I really, really appreciate that. So having specific people to train and being aware of compliance and making sure that is a thorough thing, not you just say, here's the policies. Again, hand them the manual, because somebody worked at Disney and we copy and pasted and said, here, they had the manual, they signed everything, so we're protected. The reality is we didn't go through any process that allows that person to actually feel protected or be protected. So appreciate that. Justin, I want to come with you. Last thoughts. We got like a minute. We're going to wrap this up. So for you, as somebody who is also a writer, so you're always conceptualizing stories and connecting the dots with bad practices, good practices, kind of lowest common denominators, things to aspire to, all of that. A couple things for you as you're thinking about the story that we write, about the way that we invest in training in the future. What are a couple thoughts? What are you hoping for?
I think just having, just kind of like a book, that's going to have, I don't know, like just looking at the index and being able to see what you can expect out of this.
Yes.
And that just kind of translates into, expectations of, the employees at this bar or restaurant or, whatever it may be. Because, that holds me accountable, and that holds, the employee accountable, to live up to these standards. And if I'm not doing it, as the lead bartender, or as manager, or whatever it is, then somebody's able to call me out and say, hey, like, you said that we need to do this and you're not doing it. So, like, you have to lead by example, of course. And, and just be able to step up to the plate to, answer those questions, take care of your employees and not make them feel the way that any, manager has made you feel in the past, to where, to the point that you want to quit, nobody should be in that position in any job. And, I try to, work to, make sure that the guys, the people that I work with are, feeling comfortable, safe, connected with, whatever's going on, behind the bar, whatever changes are happening and all that. And, just make sure that we have an open line of communication, because, that bar is only going to be as successful as we all individually make it, and as we make it as a team. So,
yeah, I really appreciate that. You need to have clarity around what the expectation is, so that somebody can actually thrive, that they can actually be accomplished in their job, because that's really what we want. I also like that you referenced it in the organizational concept, and I'll kind of leave everyone with this, where something that you'll see a lot more from Best Served is around micro e-learning. We're working a lot of elements where it's like these bite-sized digital training pieces, because so often we don't have the access, or we're holding so much in our minds at all times to be able to keep all that straight. Sometimes you just need to, like, grab your phone and check in, be really quick, be like, all right, I have 75 recipes in my head right now for the last 3 iterations. A guest just came in and asked for the cocktail. Is that the one that I floated on top, or is that the one that I mix it in? And the opportunity to have a resource in a place that you're looking for that. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. And, one thing that, Justin, when I heard you talking, Amanda, same thing. It's like, it's not somebody that you're training. It's not their responsibility to learn what you have to teach. It is your responsibility to learn how to teach them. And this is where the X and the nuance and being able to connect with that human being, understanding you have this organizational method, you are also making sure that you have an outcome goal. Yet in that individual interpersonal interaction, it has to be about them and what they need, not about checking that box, even though you better make damn sure you have all the boxes to check. So that's it. Amanda, Justin, really, really good. Justin, we might have to follow up and get you to write an article about this, because I appreciate the way that you think about it. And I think we do need to tell a better story. And if that connects, definitely, I think that really matters. So that is it, everybody, for this episode. Again, Best Served Podcast 268, and no more trial by fire. If you want the best people, and restaurants they are the best people, you want them to thrive, you need to invest in them. And that really, really, training has to be at the forefront of that. We cannot just keep saying, you've worked in a restaurant before, figure shit out. It does not work. And that's why restaurants close at such a high rate. And that's why we turn over people at such a high rate. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. That is it. Cheers.